what do you think the economic system should be?
Okay, so first of all, I want to point out just a couple things right off the get-go for this conversation. I
All
haven't
right.
done a lot of preparation for this. I have a slip disc in my neck. I'm not sleeping right. I have put in no work of this at all. So if you're going to want a whole
Okay.
shitload of studies and stuff, I'm not going to be able to provide them unless I can Google them in a few seconds. So that just needs to
Uh,
be set up front.
sure.
Secondly, when it comes to healthcare, you need to separate the argument into two things, which is the moral argument, which is that everybody should get healthcare, period. We shouldn't have anybody fall through the cracks at all. We should have a perfect system. And then we have the economic argument, the efficiency argument, and they're all kind of lumped together where it's which provides the best service for the best dollar and the economic argument.
Right.
Would you kind of agree to those two arguments?
Well, we talked about this when setting the debate up. Yeah, I'm not super interested in the moral side of it. I'm really like I'm in favor of single payer healthcare, and it's for pure economic reasons.
Okay, good. So I think that in this case, it's going to be more of just kind of us agreeing on a lot of topics than if you're not on the other side. But I think that that's fine because it gives me a good opportunity to kind of explain my arguments from the economic side. So we can kind of sever the moral argument because I do think that in modern times, I think that if something's moral, people are willing to ignore the fact that it doesn't work or there's a significantly better option that may be just as moral. So when stuff like minimum wage, for example, I think is a very moral argument and good intentions, but it doesn't work and it's a broken system and we should remove it.
Right.
So just as an example.
I've already agreed. Yeah. So I agree. I'm not really interested. I mean, it's an interesting debate, I suppose, but it's not one that I'm interested in right now. So, in general, to the original question, so what would be the healthcare system that you would advocate for, in economic terms, and why? What's the justification?
So somebody actually kind of changed my mind on this a couple of weeks ago, and it is kind of proof that I do sway my opinion a little bit. Previously, I was a straight up entirely private system, in that I do think that people argue straw mans a lot with the U.S. system with private healthcare advocates because they go and they point at the broken system that exists now and goes, my God, this system is fucked. And they think that we're advocating for that system when in fact we're actually advocating for major changes to that system to make it better. Right off the get-go, I would absolutely grab a whole shitload of economists and I'd get some doctors and I'd get some teachers and I'd get some politicians and I'd really do a regulation and deregulation pass of the three biggest things that are causing healthcare to fuck up, which is hospitals and doctors themselves and the derivatives of such, clinics and whatnot, the insurance and healthcare, education. Those are the three things that are causing healthcare costs to go through the roof. They need to be regulated and deregulated and fixed. Healthcare is tied to education.
I'm confused by what you mean. What do you mean healthcare is tied to education?
A lot of our costs when it comes to doctors and other healthcare is because of education costs going through the roof. That's why doctors get paid $300,000 a year, is because they have $2 million worth of student loan debts. And they're going to these schools that are pricing it through the roof because of problems within education. It's a big problem within the three things: healthcare, insurance, and education. You need to deal with all three, otherwise it'll continue to get worse.
Right. So I would argue that a single payer system is the best way to deal with all three of those concerns. And if I remember the concerns correctly, I honestly have a very bad memory. Your concerns are healthcare, insurance, and education, and really the costs thereof, right? The cost of insurance, the cost of healthcare, the cost of education.
There's problems in healthcare as well, but yes, you're right. There is.
Sure.
I do need to tackle those two things. For the recording, can you define single payer, just so that we have a common understanding?
Yeah, so I would say that a single payer system is generally a system where primary care is ubiquitous, universal, and that it's available to all citizens if they want it. I think that reasonably the duplicative services would probably not be allowed, and the operations of most healthcare would be on the national tab. And you could probably have, like every single payer system has supplemental private insurance. There'd probably still be a private pharmaceutical industry, private dental, private optometry, things like that. I mean, that would be kind of the system that I'd advocate for, more or less just the single payer systems that we have in the broader world, but in America.
So just I muted for a second. I was talking to somebody, but I heard most of that. When you say single payer, are the hospitals socialized? Like, are they the national hospitals, or are they still privately owned?
So similar to the rest of the world, there would probably mostly be state-run hospitals, but there would be also private hospitals as well.
Okay. So I just want to retract one of the statements I made earlier. I don't know why I said it, but I said that we would mostly agree. I'm going to disagree because
I
I definitely
I
don't
mean,
support
I
universal healthcare.
imagined we would
So
not. Yeah,
so it was a mistake on my part. Okay, so
that's okay.
the
Uh,
the, the big
yeah.
thing that I have an issue with with socialized healthcare is not only my own personal anecdotal experience of being in the healthcare system because it fucking blows. I live in Canada and it's awful. Um, but I also think that there's a significant amount of evidence out there that government programs that are expected to last forever just bogged down in inefficiency, pollution, not in the environmental sense, corruption, graft, just bloat, because there's no real method of them deciding efficiency and figuring things out. Where a for-profit system does have that advantage, and I know that people argue the moral side of the for-profit system, where they're like, no, it's gross that it's for profit. But if you're here discussing economics with me, it's important that we have a method of assessing efficiency and customer satisfaction in the product that they provide. And when there's only one choice, you can only go to one person, then you have no option. I only have one doctor. I can't go out and find another doctor. And as a personal anecdote, when I have a slipped disc, I had to beg my doctor just to give me Tylenol 3s. I have no option to shop around. If he says no, I'm in pain, period. So that's why on an efficiency level, when you have no way of competing, you have no alternatives, no competitors, you have no way of telling whether or not you're doing a good job. I can't shift to a different hospital to get a different surgery if this one's a 9-month wait time. That's what I'm getting.
Right, I understand. I think that the practical implication to what you're talking about is the idea that what capitalism and what market systems, I'm a capitalist, what they do very well is determine what things are worth, quote unquote. And they determine it obviously within the framework of a basic currency monetary system. And they also right, exactly, and they distribute resources relatively efficiently. Now, the issue is that obviously, and I don't know your persuasion, but generally people agree that market failures exist, and market failures, to be fair, exist in every market. It's just a matter of scale, magnitude, and if they essentially structurally would be able to distribute goods efficiently, and with relative universal access. Right now, in the case of healthcare, there are so many market failures, and there are so many structures of the biggest confounding variable, the insurance market, that are also bad, that it seems to me that a single-payer system that you describe would solve the problems that you describe better. So you talked about insurance, education, and what was the third one? I'm sorry. It was healthcare. Or sure, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
But so obviously, in a just
to cut in here, just to redefine that.
Yeah,
healthcare is the problem, and you got two of them that are also compound that make it a triplicate.
Okay, yeah, sure. So healthcare, obviously a single payer healthcare would get rid of really the bulk of the insurance market. So it would, that I guess we could assume that the insurance market wouldn't necessarily be a problem in a single payer system. It's not an unreasonable assumption.
I can agree.
Now, in terms of education, you made a statement that I think is not really, I don't think you could prove it to be true, which is that doctors are paid a lot because their school costs a lot. But that's not really true. And it's not how the market sets wages. Right now, we have a system where the market
You're right. You're right. I will concede what you're saying is true, and I think what I'm trying to make a broad, complex point into a single sentence. I'll agree what I said was incorrect because wages are determined by supply and demand.
And I can understand generally your point that, hey, well, part of the reason that healthcare costs what it does is because doctors get paid a lot, doctors have malpractice insurance, and because doctors' training is relatively expensive. That goes into the cost. I get that. But the single payer, I do see your point, yes. So single payer solves all of these issues universally, and it's empirically demonstrated to solve these issues. The fact is that while it is the case that doctors in other nations get paid less, also single-payer systems are provably a lot better at actually training doctors. There's many single-payer nations across the world where they have a net influx of doctors. People immigrate to be doctors there, even though they get paid less than the American system, and they actually train more doctors than we do in America. So you can take away the cost of medical education. you can, with relative, kind of like a teacher's salary or like a cop's salary, where you're, as a doctor in a single payer system, you're paid a decent wage, but you're not paid $500,000 a year. You're paid maybe 150 or something. And there's not necessarily a need for malpractice insurance, because similar to how the police and how teachers are organized, if you sue a doctor in a single payer system, you're suing the state, and the state can still pay it out. That's
not a good thing.
No. Well, hold on. But the state can still pay out. As you know, in Canada, the state can still pay out. What do you call it? Settlements and things like that.
I want to cut in here.
Solves all of those problems.
All right, I'm going to cut in here just because there's a couple things that you said that I don't agree with, and I'm going to cut you on the last thing. It's definitely not a good thing to have the state as the giant entity that you have to sue in order to get restitution for damages. As somebody who's dealing with some issues right now against the state, I've called about 20 lawyers, and every single one of them has said it's a conflict of interest as soon as I say that it's the state or the local police. So you saying, well, you can just sue the state, that's not a good thing. I'd much rather sue a private hospital.
What's a conflict of interest? What do you mean?
They've said it's a way of them fobbing me off. They said, "Oh, conflict of interest. I can't serve as your lawyer. Sorry."
Well, what I can tell you is that we can use police as not an experiment, but I think a reasonable extension of an example of how this would work in America and how it works in the rest of the developed world with single payer systems is that. When a doctor in a single payer system, or a cop, for instance, fucks up in such a way that someone's life is ended or someone's life is made demonstrably worse because they caused a disability of some kind, there's not exactly a shortage of legal help that this person can have access to, and the payouts usually do happen. Now, if you wanted to make a step and say, hey, you should be able to personally sue doctors or personally sue like the locality that did actually wrong you, I'm actually totally, I'm not necessarily against that, right?
It can't be the state. The state doesn't work. And I'm going to interrupt here just for 1 second. I've let you talk for a whole lot, but I have to say at this point.
Yeah, say it.
The problem with this is that what often happens is that the state sets up a body in which to organize transparency, quote unquote, of investigations of these groups. Correct?
Oh, well, yeah, there's usually committee structure and democratic structure, yeah.
Okay, I'm currently dealing with one of those in Ontario right now called the Office of the Independent Police Department of Adjudication or something like that. It's the OIPRD. That's how I know them. They're the investigators that investigate the police. And I can demonstrate this point. I'm not going to send it to you, but just trust me on this. I can provide substantive proof of this in the sense of actual documents.
What are the Mounties doing?
Not the Mounties, the Ontario Provincial Police. I literally have a document from them admitting everything that I accused them of, and then the report came back as unsubstantiated. So when you tell me that a state body set up to investigate itself is going to have the best interests of the people, I don't believe any of that nonsense and that socialist garbage.
So Chester,
I just have one sentence?
Yeah.
Anybody who trusts the government needs to do more history. Because you can't trust the body of the government to have the best interests of the people. It's a progressive tyranny. Go on.
So, are you an anarchist?
No. What I am is a libertarian and an Austrian economist, and I think that it's very close to libertarian, but you pull it back a bit. There needs to be military, police, courts, law and order.
Right.
And that's just about it.
So, even though it is a problem sometimes with transparency and the ability for justice to be enacted, you would not say the solution to your problem with the provincial police would be to privatize the police. That would not be a solution to your problem.
I would what I would do is I would take the OIPRD and I would take its funding and I would use it to provide funding to the people who have complaints to go to actual lawyers.
Well, there you go. I mean, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think you've made my point for me, which right.
That's an isolated incident.
Well, it's certainly an isolated incident, but you're the one that used it as an example. I wouldn't use my personal experience as examples like that. But engaging with the example, obviously the issue is that, of course, you can create structures that can hold healthcare providers accountable, even hold them directly accountable in the case where malice happened. But it doesn't necessarily mean the entire structure is wrong. You talk about your Canadian experience. The reality is 85-90% of Canadians do not support a more privatized healthcare system. They recognize, hey,
I think you have to provide me evidence of that. because I think
Well,
what you're talking about are
yeah.
surveys that say, are you happy with your healthcare? And unfortunately, that's not an argument for which is better, because all that's doing is going, are you happy with what you're getting? It's not an argument for or with or anything. It's just saying, are you happy or not? Sure,
Yeah.
if you're getting what you're getting and you're like, sure, whatever, I get what I need. Yeah, it doesn't make it better or worse. That's not really an argument.
Yeah,
Now,
sure. So
you
I
said that
can well, I linked the poll. I just to finish the point. The poll said, yeah, it's in the chat. The poll essentially, the idea of the poll was, would you support a more private solution for the problems you see in the healthcare system, or would you prefer to strengthen the public system? And 8 or 9 out of 10 of Canadians.
Can you copy paste that?
It's in the chat. I linked it to you.
Yeah, I'm looking at that. It's big.
It's big. What do you mean?
Yeah, I was saying if you have the line in there, can you copy paste it?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's the line. But the point is though, and that's not necessarily a controversial claim. When you look at even other single payer systems, New Zealand. I think it's controversial whether or not Australia is a single payer system, so let's ignore it. But New Zealand, the Nordic countries, the UK are kind of the main examples that I can think of. Generally, the sentiment in these countries is not, okay, we need to get rid of state control. We need to get rid of the state power of the healthcare. It's how can we reform our state system in such a way to make it more transparent and more universal. And so that's my main point. Now, obviously, you haven't addressed the point on education costs or the insurance market.
We're gonna have a nice long chat, so don't you worry. I'll certainly address those points, but I need to address the point of what you just linked. Because
yeah, sure.
What it is this is why I don't like discussing this topic with people, and I don't want you to take this as a personal attack. It's more in general with people who do this, because I actually addressed exactly what this poll did, and it's actually in the article that you linked, and I'm going to link it to you right now, and I'm going to say it for the people that are on comms right now. In that report, a leading indicator points to the fact that, and quote, most Canadians, 85.2%, aged 15 years and older, reported being, quote, very satisfied or somewhat satisfied, unquote, with the way overall healthcare services were provided, unchanged from 2005.
Right. Where's
that's what the poll is reporting on.
Chester, hold on, Chester, you're ignoring the second line, which says that more than
the second line is the writer talking in his own point. This is what the poll actually said.
Well, no, it's a quote. It's a quote. It's with more than 8 in 10 well, hold on. With more than 8 in 10 Canadians supporting public solutions to make public healthcare stronger, there is compelling evidence that Canadians across all demographics would prefer a public over a for-profit healthcare system. I mean, that's
the words of the article writer, not of the poll. I don't give a shit what the article writer.
No, those are the words of the person who conducted the survey. It is Nick Nanos.
Listen, stop. I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt right now, and I'm going to put an end to this. Look at the sentence above that. Okay. A new poll conducted by the Toronto-based Nanos Research Point points to overwhelming support, 86.2% for strengthening public health care rather than expanding for-profit services. And then you look down and it's 85.2% in the thing that I pasted to you. That's the number. That's what the poll is. They're spinning it with their own words.
If that's the number, why is it a different number?
I don't fucking know.
Well, it's because it's a different number.
Can you tell me the poll? I think it's a typo, or they've changed it, or they've included.
Okay, well, hey, forget the fact that one says 86 and one says 85. That, to me, that would indicate that they're different questions. But let's talk about the head of Nanos Research, the poll that you just quoted and the poll that I just quoted. The head of Nanos Research said more than 8 in 10 Canadians support public solutions and making public healthcare stronger. Now, do you think he's lying, or do you think he doesn't understand the poll he conducted?
I think that this is a push poll.
Okay, so you think he's misleading the public? No, that's fair. That you could maybe make that argument.
I think yes. On a political level, I think that this is definitely something that's being spun like that. Healthcare Now is probably a left-leaning publication. It's definitely for Medicare for all. It's definitely biased. No offense, it is.
Well, they're talking about the poll. It doesn't matter what website's reporting on the poll.
No, I mean, the publication itself, Healthcare Now, that's doing this publication, is definitely biased.
No, okay. So, for instance, if the Daily Caller or Fox News posted like an academic study, Right. If
Well,
they
you have to understand though that right now we're not talking about the study. We're talking about the words of people that are talking about the study.
we're
Right.
talking about the guy who did the study, his words. His words
Correct.
are relevant in actually analyzing the study. Now, let's get
Can
now.
you find the study?
I guess I can find it as we're making the point, but
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the
I'm not gonna
actual.
hold you to stuff like that.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I don't know if the poll was actually released or if this is just something being reported on. But the point is though is that I would say that generally the sentiment, at least from all the reporting, from all the polling that I've seen, you know, I guess if you assume all of the polls are push polls, I suppose, but generally the
No, I
sentiment
never said
is
that. I want to see the poll itself so I can look at the words that they asked and what
okay.
the
Well,
numbers
for
actually
instance,
are.
let's run the experiment. There was a party in the UK running on privatizing the healthcare system. You know what percent of the vote they got? They didn't even win a single seat. They were not a they collapsed on themselves, right? No major party in Canada supports privatizing the healthcare system. There's a
Because it's a political death sentence.
well, but
That's
if it but hold on, but Chester, that begs the question: if it's a political death sentence, don't you imagine it's because people like the public healthcare system?
So the problem is that in Canada especially, is that there's such a negative slight against the private stuff because we want to separate ourselves from America. And I'll move on from this point very quickly and continue the point, attacking that point. But we take that as a way of separating ourselves. So there is some culture aspects to that of going, oh, we'll take care of everybody. And the Americans, they let people die. It's a way of separating us culturally, which is part of Canadian culture. Like we're tied to, but we also try to separate ourselves culturally. Secondly, I think that all of the parties that are actually in existence and that are noticed in Canada are all neoliberal left-leaning groups to begin with. I think that the PPC supports some private care. And I think that even I have a plan to open a party in Canada, but even if I did, I would probably put some sort of let's move slowly towards private as opposed to like let's just fucking dump it.
Well, the People's
I mean,
Party didn't win a single seat. They got routed. They got demolished.
That's not the point.
Well,
the point
well,
is
it's
that,
kind of the point.
well, no, you said that is there a major party that's running it? They're a major party. They have
Well,
ridings in it. They have somebody in every.
by major party, I
party
typically mean like viable in the election. Like you can actually feasibly win at least a couple. Like the leader of the PPC lost his own seat.
Yeah,
like
he's a nut job. It's not the point. It's a major party with somebody running in every riding.
Sure.
So and regardless, I don't think that it's a very strong argument for you to go that, hey, there really isn't any political parties that are doing well. Because one of the things that I think is that there's a lot of people that don't argue the merits of private care. I think that the private care argument is something that requires a lot of economic knowledge. You have to understand that profit is a way to determine efficiency and where you should put money and try to figure things out that way. And I think that a lot of people argue the straw man very easily of you want us to be like the United States. And that's a very easy straw man to fall for. And a lot of people can't really argue that. And it's very easy because you go, I'm not
Right.
arguing for that.
Well, the only reason I brought up the popularity of the Canadian system, and I feel like we've shifted a lot. So the original claim was, you know, hey, Accountable, you're not understanding what the question is that they're asking this poll. Then the next claim was, well, the poll, there's a push poll, you can't trust the poll. And now the claim is that,
Now,
let me just finish. I'm not, no, you didn't say that the poll was inaccurate. You just claimed it was a push poll, and you claimed that the question was maybe misleading or improperly cited. Now, that's the clearest way I can state your position. But, and then the next claim was that, well, it's a cultural part of Canada, you know, okay, maybe it is the case that they don't support privatizing the system, but that's because of essentially the institutional strength of the system and not because it's good or bad. Now that's fair, we can have that argument, but the only reason I brought all that stuff up, the only reason it wasn't a side was because you brought up I don't like the Canadian healthcare system, and here's why. Well, I have to then reasonably point to, you know, the idea that, well, you're not every Canadian, obviously.
Of course. I wasn't using that as anything other than an anecdote to point at something.
Okay. Well, let's. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
And I, regardless of any anecdotes that I've said, I can certainly make the case economically that the private system is better. So
Okay, make the
anything
case.
totally I can move. Well, I made it very clear right off the get-go that the profit motive is something that absolutely needs to be considered. You can't just dismiss that. That's the reason why long-term government programs tend to just get awful and awful and awful. And the problem is that you're throwing money at it just nonstop, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And when you look at some of the numbers and some of the places that you're considered to be bloated, you look and it's just straight up administration costs. You have middle management, you have extra layers created, and it's nothing but graft and bloat. Where a private system wouldn't do that. They'd want to make every dollar, and they'd have it nice and quick and efficient. Now, there's a couple other things that I think are important. First of all, I think that private care in a private system allows for innovation, and I think that it allows for hospital, clinic, and care innovation as well. When you have too much regulation and you have everything regimented, you really prevent people from attacking it from different angles. Like I had an idea of like doing something like nurses on the internet where they can give advice and they can check you out over a video cam and stuff. And it was for a class in college, and the teacher said, "Yeah, but there's no way in hell you can do that with regulations." And it's stuff like that. Just using that as an anecdote and an example, of course. It's examples like that where you need to have that innovation in the private system, where I don't think you could have it in the public system, because not only would it get stymied down in regulation, there might be the ability of people to stop it to protect their own jobs, which wouldn't happen in a private system. But you wouldn't have the innovation likely, because they think the only way to move forward is this system, and that applies to public education as well.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to private care as well, what I think is important is that you're not dictating wages and prices, and that the best worker goes to the place where he's most needed. Where if you need to have critical health care or heart care, you need to have the best cardiac guy. And you know what? New York's got the best money. He wants the vet to go there. It's not where the government tells him, it's where the most money is. Personally, when you made your statements about doctors coming into your country, when you made public your arguments on public, I'd want to know where those doctors are coming from, because I think that you're going to find that most of them are coming from either other European countries or South Africa or South America or the Caribbean. I have a friend of mine who went to the Caribbean in order to train to be a doctor. I think you'd have very few coming from the United States. I know that Canada has a significant flight of doctors coming from our universities and colleges to the United States. Same with our doctors and physio care and whatnot. So I think that the ability to have your wages dictated by the market is important.
Yeah, sure. So what I would say to that is that so you've made three fundamental points, which is that I guess I should say cause brain drain. I'm just writing them down. So you said private systems wouldn't have administrative bloat because there's not as much appetite for administrative bloat in a private system. Private systems are more innovative. I understand. And then you said that essentially the market set wages can help alleviate brain drain, where people might be leaving your country to go get some decent wages. You used Canada as a specific example of this, where doctors are leaving Canada to go to the United States. Now, to give an overview to these points, to anyone listening, well, I understand. Yeah, we can. This is an aside, but throughout this debate, I think hopefully what people or what I'm going to garner is that nothing that you've just said can be empirically demonstrated, and I'll go one by one and demonstrate each of these points. So you said that private systems wouldn't have the capacity for as much administrative bloat. Well, the U.S. has the most administrative bloat of any healthcare system in the developed world, right? That's including Switzerland with private insurance. That's including single-payer systems, multi-payer systems. If you look at the percentage of our healthcare costs that is administrative bloat, about a third of our healthcare costs is administrative bloat. You look at Canada, single-payer system, it's half of that percentage. It's only about 15 or 17%, right?
Yes.
You talk about private innovation. Well, I saw a study that I referenced in a video I made on this topic, which was that, innovation tends to simply be correlated with the amount of spending on that thing. Now, obviously, when everything is under the public tab, you can have the same amount of spending as a country on research and development. For instance, right, I could make the exact same argument that we shouldn't have a public military because it's going to kill innovation and we're not going to be as capable defensively if we have a publicly funded military. But the reality is, and the same thing with single-payer systems across the world, is that private firms are still incentivized to research and develop. It's just that these are public contracts and the money gets circulated in that way. There's not good evidence that, per capita spending or the spending itself that the U.S. does on medical equipment or medical care is more efficient than public spending by other countries or even public spending within the United States. And the third thing you said was that, Canadian doctors are leaving to go get the higher wages. But if that's the case, why is the foreign-born percentage of doctors in Canada, why is that percentage increasing? And why is it that doctors... Well, I understand, but why wouldn't the immigrants go to America if what you say is true, that they want higher wages? And why is it also the case, right? I understand. So, and then why is it also the case that not only is that percentage increasing, but they currently have more foreign doctors as a percentage than the United States? Or I'm sorry, I misquoted that. Canada and the U.S. they have around the same percentage of foreign trained doctors. I was looking at foreign trained nurses where they have more of. Why is that the case? None of these things can be empirically demonstrated.
So let me tackle a couple of things. The first couple of your arguments, I can just immediately hand wave away and say straw man, because I told you right off the get-go that
Wait,
a lot of the argument. Hold on. A lot of your arguments are going, look at the United States, and I'm going, I don't want that system. That's not my argument.
Yeah, you're arguing for a more private system than the U.S.
Yes,
I'm saying that the
hold on.
Yeah.
Allow me to argue my points. I'll let you say your 3 points.
Yeah, go for it. Whatever. Yeah.
I'm going to address a lot of your points very quickly here, and because honestly, I've kind of forgotten the middle one, but it doesn't matter.
It had to do with innovation.
I'm casually. Oh, right, innovation. I'll try to tackle that. So right off the get-go, I think that you're going to realize very quickly that you're arguing a straw man with a lot of the arguments that you're making. I don't want the United States system. It's broken and it's fucked up and it's awful. So when he's sort of pointing to it and going, but it's inefficient, it's just going to be responded with, yes, it's awful. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say about it, because that's all you're proving is that the current U.S. system is trash. And I'm agreeing with you. We have a common ground there. And I'm going, but I want to have a serious deregulation and regulation passed to make it more private, to make it better. Because it's trash right now, because there's regulations where there don't need to be regulations, and there's not regulations where there need to be regulations. And for me, a perfect system would be the government providing critical care in the sense of like emergency rooms, and that's it. Everything else is private. And that's it. That's my view. So when you go, well, the U.S. system is more bloated than public, okay? Yeah, the U.S. system is fucking awful because of insurance, because of education costs, which I can agree is maybe a slight addition, but it's something we can still tackle. But it's mostly because of regulations and deregulations that need to happen. So that dismisses your arguments of well, the U.S. is awful. We need to realize that in a pure private system, and you have to transition, you can give funding where you can in order to help spurn or spawn the sort of arguments that you or places that you need. But the argument of the U.S. is trash is no good. Now, when it comes to innovation, I think that you're very quickly going to, let me rephrase. When it comes to innovation, one of the problems that's going with public health care and this public innovation argument is that you're going, yeah, but if we fund it properly. The problem is that what you're doing is you're appealing to politicians who have multiple ways of saying no, of dragging ass, of pulling your teeth and stuff, where the private market doesn't have that problem. Because there's no way in hell that you're going to say that there's no demand for healthcare and that they're going to struggle. What's going to happen is that they're going to fight over every fucking penny that they can in order to make their business efficient, if we can actually clear some of the roadblocks that are currently existing. And that's why I liked some of the things that Donald Trump did in regards to healthcare. I think if he would have been elected in, and I'm not going to get into that argument, if he would have continued a lot of those emergency orders, I think it would have been great, especially the one that with the competition of foreign places with Medicare. It would save the government millions.
Right. So I think, so what I'm describing isn't necessarily a straw man. What you're advocating for apparently is a nationalized emergency care system with a privatized everything else, right? So what I'm saying is that the United States, right? The United States is the primary and also the biggest example of a more private health insurance system. Switzerland is kind of an example, but Switzerland still has public expenditure, and they also have heavy regulation on health insurance markets and how healthcare is extended to people in that country.
But they're
And so
tiny,
you
right?
Well, right, but that's why I'm using the United States as my main focal point of showing that
Sure.
private systems are wrong. Now, if you hand wave all the empirics and say, okay, well, everything about the
Well,
U.S. system that's
fully
bad.
hand wave it. I wouldn't. Let me rephrase. I wouldn't fully hand wave it. You'd have to be able to make a more broad, a more concrete, accurate point about exactly what you're bringing. Because when you just go, well, there's more bloat in the U.S. system. I'm going, yeah, I know. I want to fix it. So if you're able to bring a study or something that might have a more accurate point that you can argue on, knowing that I'm going to hand wave strawmans that are just kind of like the system sucks and you point to it, if you can construct a better argument, I'm listening.
Right, I get what you're saying. I'm getting there.
Go on,
So,
go on.
you
So
talk
I'm
about
trying not
the
to interrupt.
no worries, but so you talk about the problems with public expenditure. Oh, it's not going to be funded properly. Well, number one, we already fund a shitload of research done on the private market. But forget about that. Again, private entities are still incentivized to spend dollars researching medical equipment, much like they are incentivized to spend money researching military technology and military equipment, because it's still profitable.
Can I ask you a question on your point?
Sure, go for it.
Are you going to put a price cap on a medication or tools or equipment?
So I would argue that price caps on pharmaceuticals and negotiated costs on medical equipment and services could be efficient. And I think that in general, that is okay as long as the government properly subsidizes things, which I think, in the case of defense, they do. In the case of other single payer systems, they do. I mean, for instance, I could point simply to the examples of national healthcare systems across the world and say, would anybody really be terrified if they had a heart attack and had to go to a Canadian hospital or a British hospital? I mean, probably not. These are modern, developed nations with certainly adequate medical technology available to them that's relatively innovative. Now, moving on to the broader point, the more I have to unfortunately. Well,
Is it going to be about what you just talked about?
No. It's gonna. This is. I have to move.
Then we have to address that stuff.
Well, you said you didn't want to engage. You didn't want to really talk about the U.S. You didn't want to have the U.S. debate. So I'm trying to broaden the discussion out a little bit. But if you want to continue on the U.S.
Okay, so if it's about that stuff and you're broadening it, then go ahead.
Right. So to broaden it out a little bit, now, since I can't use the U.S. empirics of the private system doesn't necessarily work as well, I'll rely a little bit more on economic theory, and I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this. So
Sure.
the economic theory is relatively simple, which is that the healthcare as a market doesn't work, and it doesn't work in virtually any way that makes markets competitive. For instance, right, there's not free entry and exit. We've heard of that. There's not an unlimited number of suppliers and firms, right? But there's not even close to that. There's not a free flow of information. There's also asymmetric information. You're not going to probably know as much about medicine as your doctor, for instance, which creates problems. Same thing with your pharmacist. Same thing with your optometrist. All of that stuff, right? There's,
I don't know anything about
all
my
of.
car.
Well, I understand, but there's all of the pillars of like what makes a market competitive. For instance, like how do you know if a product's good or not? That's very simple. Apples, easy. Watermelons, easy, right? You know if a watermelon's good or not. That shit's easy. But if if I go to the doctor and say, hey, I've got a sore throat, and the doctor says, hey, you've got this disease, you've got a throat infection of this kind, here's a medication for it. I have no way of knowing, number one, even if he's right, I have no way of knowing if the medication he prescribed is good at actually treating my illness. And the biggest part is I don't know if there's actually a better, more equivalent alternative to that is cheaper in the form of a generic or a competing brand that would be cheaper. Like, and so the broadest. Right. Well, hold on. Just one more sentence. The broadest point is that getting rid of regulations doesn't solve the problems of costs in the healthcare market. It doesn't make it more efficient. It makes it worse. And my question to you would be: can you give me 3 or 4 healthcare regulations that you would get rid of that you think would make the healthcare market more efficient, or like reforms that you would have in mind? Because vaguely saying I would get rid of regulations.
Why don't I just point at the 4 executive orders that Donald Trump.
It doesn't really work.
How about that? Sure, it does.
Yeah, sure. Talk about it.
The first one that so first of all, I want to touch on your 2 points because I can address them very quickly. The first one is that you're again arguing a straw man. I don't care if the system right now is worse because I'm not arguing for that, and we're going to be able to fix some of them. First one is that it needs regulations, and some of them need deregulations. So remember that I'm arguing for both, because 2 of the executive orders that Donald Trump did, I quite liked, and I really liked them. Which is that what he did was that he ordered that hospitals have a basic price list disclosed for a lot of their common procedures. Things like, sorry, I want to write something really quickly so I don't forget it. Okay, so the whole point was that they have to disclose prices for a lot of their most common procedures, things like a broken bone and stuff like that, where you can have time in which to go and look. And if we can eliminate the regulations that prevent hospitals and clinics from opening, and we can get more options, that would allow you to do stuff like that. Now, secondly, when you come to things like doctors and you're like, I don't know if he's any good, I'm going to say 2 things very quickly. The first is that that's what courts are for. If the doctor fucks up, you take him to court and you take him for malpractice. If we have better access to courts and we fund that, like I said, rather than funding some of these programs, then we're going to be able to take them to court. That is what court is supposed to be for in our system. Because not only if the doctor isn't qualified, he'll get hit with fraud. And that's a criminal charge. And you'll get civil restitution for your injuries. And now, while that's not good if you die or something like that, it's also a penalty. So it's awful, but that's the way it is. Secondly, the issue that you have to deal with as well. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. You can go while I think.
Yeah, sure. So, you talked about the Trump executive order on price transparency. That is an example of a regulation actually causing more competition. But then he used an example that proved my point, which was the idea that, hey, if you break an arm, you've got time to shop around. Well, what if you break your legs in a fall and an ambulance takes you to a hospital? You don't have a choice in that regard. With it's hard to compete or hard to have a competitive overview when a lot of the demand for healthcare is absolutely inelastic, right? That's another structural problem.
I agree with you. I agree with you because it's a twofold answer because I agree. First of all, I think a regulation should happen that any emergency room visit should be mandated to be covered by your insurance because it's ridiculous that you can be put into a hospital that your fucking insurance doesn't cover when you're having a heart attack. Regulation, bang, done. 100% support in Congress. It would have no problem. It would fucking soar through Congress. The problem is that our politicians are not doing it. So we share common ground in that one. That one's horse shit. But secondly, my own position is that should be done by the federal government. Is that we should be going, okay, critical care will handle. We'll have the best shit. Make sure that we can handle it and that it's available. We can scale it up. It's a very focused government program, right? They're not getting into cancer care. They're not getting into rehab. They're not getting into dental care and optometrists and dental care, and it just gets this big massive bloated system. If they just focus on critical care, as in are you going to die in the next fucking 10 minutes, but frankly I don't see a reason why you're taking with a broken arm to the fucking ER.
Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, I think it's somewhat of an emergency when you break your arm or something.
Probably.
Well, if you break your arm, it's not. I mean, well, shit. If you break your arm, I mean, it's not like you. I mean, you can't. That's an emergency scenario. You need to. You don't have necessarily the latitude. The second point that you made was that courts would solve essentially the problem of malpractice, but the problem is it kind of contradicts what you said earlier, which was the idea that the great thing about markets is that they can distribute resources based on where the money is. You used like doctors where they decide to study, right? Where the demand is, but. The problem with that is that doesn't necessarily always lead to better outcomes. For instance, we don't allow people to buy their position in the organ donation list line. It's based on priority, right? If a wealthy person needs a new liver and they could just buy their way to the front, that's not really a tenable system that would be tolerated, I don't think, by most people. And I think that a system that moves us closer to that, the idea of priority based purely on your ability to pay, that is a system
that's making a moral argument.
Well, no. I'm also making a practical argument, which is that this actually leads to a more inefficient, less efficient distribution of resources, right? Healthcare should be distributed as efficiently as it can based on need. This isn't a luxury expense, right? When private industry decides that shoes cost this much and it's going to be distributed based on the competition in the market and, the demand and the, things like that, that's fine because it's shoes, right? But in the case of healthcare, when your demand for healthcare depends, obviously on your individual health needs and wants, well, that's a scenario where you need probably some pretty strict government oversight, and I would argue government production of that supply, because otherwise, you end up with an inefficient distribution of goods. In this case, based primarily on who can pay and how much, and to me, it's not a better system. So
I have to cut in. So I have no problem if if we had a way of making livers. If the government was like, okay, we're going to run a liver plant, we're going to supply all the hospitals with livers. Yeah, I'm cool with that. But I also don't think that's your point. Again, you're making the moral argument, because I don't think that there's anything immoral about having livers go on the market. First of all, if they're going to a charity, the charity can run it however the fuck they want. So if somebody's like, I'm going to give up my organ to this guy rather than the for-profit organization. But I think that there's also... Think about if two rich fuckers like Bezos and Gates both come down with pancreatic cancer and they're bidding over a fucking pancreas. How much money could you raise for that goddamn hospital rather than just giving it to them for free?
Right. So I don't think that a world, you don't want to make a moral argument, but I guess just to say, I don't think a world...
Making a moral argument.
No, I'm saying you don't want to make a moral argument. What I'm saying is No, okay, Chester, I'm saying you don't want to make a moral argument. I'm agreeing with you and moving on by saying that, in general, I think that a world where economics is the distribution of scarce resources, right? And how can we most efficiently distribute scarce resources? Well, I would say that in the case of the market for livers or the market for heart or the market for kidneys or lungs, right, the organs people would transplant most normally, the market is more efficient when people who need those things the most, because it is a need, it's not a want, can receive those things in a timely manner. And a market where really, despite your need or despite the sort of significance of your need, you can just buy and bid up the price of organs, does not an efficient distribution of resources makes. That's what economics is. And that's why sometimes, I'm a capitalist, but sometimes the distribution in a market is better determined by a state actor than private enterprise. And healthcare is probably the best example of that.
Let me ask you a question. Let's say on the private system, the liver ends up being $500,000. Can we just settle on a fantasy number?
Whatever, 500 grand, sure.
That's a high enough number that a normal person would never be able to afford it without liquidating everything. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe $1 million. Let's make it $1 million. All right.
$1 million.
Wouldn't you say that would incentivize people to create a way to make livers, to research that?
Well,
the ability to compete in that market by providing livers.
Well, no, not necessarily, because you have to consider a couple things, right? Which is that, number one, as soon as someone is able to create a way to produce in a mass scale livers, the price of livers goes way down, right? And so, no, it's not bad at all. But what I'm saying is that the motivation for creating a liver production factory isn't because, I can charge $500,000 for a liver today. Well, a company deciding that already knows that, well, hey, if we come up with a way to generate liver tissue, obviously at that point, the price of livers goes way down, and that's taken into account in the cost, right? That's why a lot of one more sentence, which is to say that that's why it's relatively well-founded that something that government can bring to the market of healthcare and medical services is long-term research that isn't necessarily dependent on short-term market needs and wants. Right, and something like liver production is an example of that.
Now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you two questions at once.
Okay.
How many companies today have patents on insulin, and how many patents have been held since 1900?
How many companies today have patents on insulin? How many patents on insulin have been held since 1900, or patents in general?
Yeah. we can ballpark numbers. Patents on insulin since 1900.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to tell me.
Okay. There's 3 companies right now that own patents on insulin that are in the market, and I
Okay.
think there's been 7 or 9 since 1906 when the or 1911. I don't fucking know. Like I said, I'm not prepared for this paper, Wes.
Yeah, no worries. I'll take your word for it.
So the argument of, well, the price will go down because of competition. I mean, I really don't agree with that argument, and I think that you're cognitive dissonting away from the point. And I really want you to think about your argument here, because really what you're going is, well, what if they make so many livers that now it's fucking free? Well, that's a great thing. Why are we complaining about that?
No, Chester, I'm not complaining about that. I'm saying that your concept, the idea of, oh, well, if livers are so expensive, doesn't that incentivize people to enter the market of livers? But the problem is that, right, I understand. The problem is that you're applying, this is where Econ 101 can be misapplied, right? So for instance, right, say that we have a consumable good, like say for some reason shoes just cost $1,000 per pair. Like, who the fuck knows why? It just does, right? Let's say that that's the case. Well, there's an incentive and an ability for people to enter that market and capture that $1,000, and that would drive the competition up and the cost down, because shoes are not exactly an incredibly complex thing to manufacture, and the technology to manufacture them already exists, right? That's a scenario where more competition can cause prices to go down and distribute resources more efficiently. However, the reason that livers are expensive in a private market, or the reason they would be expensive if they were in a private market, an auction system, is because we don't have a way to produce them. The only way to produce them is to grow a human being and take their liver from them, obviously voluntarily, voluntarily, of course.
Yes.
If they die, or, basically if they die, or if you take a portion of their liver, things like that. That's why the price of liver is so expensive, right? It's not a function of the market. It's a structure of.
System we're talking about, because that was the construct of the $1 million liver.
Well, obviously, yeah, because we don't have that system today. What I'm saying is that this is a perfect example of how a more privately run system does not equal a more efficient distribution of resources. And the healthcare broadly has a lot of examples of this, and that's why nationalized systems
hold on,
are more efficient.
How would that not be an efficient system? Because your system is going, well, first come, first serve, or it would be on a, well, they're sicker, so it's going to go to them. Sorry, but an efficient system is still, my system is still efficient. It's just using money as an efficiency, where you're using a subjective feeling of, well, doctors say they're sicker, or first come, first serve, which really isn't either moral or fucking, well, I guess the doctor's one is moral, but or efficient.
Well, I don't think that. Now you're making a moral argument, but I don't think that in general.
Saying that my system is efficient. That's all my argument was.
I understand. So I guess that makes sense. We can say that. So what I'm trying to say is that the efficiency of a market is determined by the people whose demand is on that indifference curve being able to receive the product at equilibrium, right? Well, a person's demand for a liver is obviously going to be based entirely on their individual healthcare context, right? So, for instance, I have no demand for a liver. To me, a liver is worth $0 because I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have cirrhosis. There's no reason I would need a liver transplant, right? And so at the same time, say that someone has whatever disease causes them to need a liver today, or they're going to die tomorrow. That person's demand is infinite virtually, right? They, if they've got $10 million, well, they'll pay $10 million. The problem with a private system where there's bidding on organs is that you have a situation where there's a disconnect between an individual's demand for a liver and their propensity to pay for that liver. For instance, say that Jeff Bezos needs a liver, quote unquote, but the reality is he has 12 months to live, and he doesn't really require a liver, and functionally he can live until a liver can be allocated to him based on his need, based on the available livers that there are, right? And that's how we do it today. That is efficient because the same number of people are getting the livers. It's just that it's based on their demands. It's based on their needs, right? However, in a system,
how is Bezos buying that? He's buying it from a private company, right?
I'm saying in the system we have today, he's not buying it. It's based on his need. But in the system that you're talking about, an organ has to be given to him based on basically his net worth, the ability for him to buy it, gets sold to Jeff Bezos. But then you've got people on the front end of their demand for liver not getting livers because the market is constricting livers from people who need them more so. Now you could say that, hey, why should we trust a doctor when they say you need a liver? Sometimes doctors are wrong. Don't call that a straw man. I'm not. No. Stop, Chester. I'm gonna interrupt. Hold on. I'm gonna interrupt you on this one. I am not making a moral. I'm making a strictly theoretical economic argument. A strict economic argument in this regard, right? That it is not more efficient to have a privately run and privately distributed organ system than the one that we have now. It is strictly economic. It is not a moral argument at all.
Okay, so two things then. I have two questions. One, what system are we using now? We need to confirm what this debate is on, because there's two things that are floating right now. Is either it's doctors thinking about priority, so triage, or it's based on first in, first out. Which one are we talking about?
So,
and then second question.
Organs are not distributed based on who shows up to get the organ. So the way that we...
So it's not first in, first out. It's based on demand by the doctors, going to like a board somehow.
Well, yeah, it's based on your sickness and your need for a liver, a kidney, a lung, things like that. I mean,
So the way that I understand that it works, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a kind of a first in, first out, ranked on need, and then as the liver comes in, it counts.
It's not a first in, first out. There's no
hold on, let me rephrase.
Okay.
Based on need. So like the sicker people are at the top, and like the people who are more all right are near the bottom, right? And then if somebody really gets sick, they can get slotted in wherever, and then as livers become available, it chunks down from the top. So I said ranked by need, first in, first out, kind of by need. That's
sure.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm not making the same argument. Yeah.
Okay.
I know I use the same words, but I'm not making that same argument. I'm sorry for the confusion. Like I said, I'm not feeling well and I'm on medication.
Yeah.
Because of my knee.
Yeah, I understand. You said you slipped a disc or something, but
yeah, I slipped a disc. I'm not sleeping well. That's why I said I'm not prepared for this.
You're good, bud. Yeah, no worries.
Hear me out on this, because the second question is important as well. We need to define what efficiency is, because I really don't accept the argument that efficiency is also by need, because I think that, first of all, we can agree that supply and demand is by nature efficient. So if they're throwing livers up on the market for ordering, like bids and asks, so to speak, then it's efficient. The question is whether or not yours is also efficient, and whether or not we accept that as the definition of efficient. Because I think what you're doing is you're, and I hate to say it again, but I think you're making the moral argument of these people deserve it more because they're more sick and they're going to die sooner, therefore it's efficient. But I think that the ending of that sentence, it should be therefore it's moral. And that's why I'm saying I think you're making the moral argument, just arguing, like throwing efficient at the end instead of moral.
Okay, what is a demand curve? Define that.
Well, are you referring to supply and demand curves?
Yes. On the demand of the supply demand model, what is a demand curve? What is it?
I don't have an answer for you.
So a demand curve is nothing more than the aggregated indifference curves of a market. So you have you have an amount of money, and you've got price. Right. But it's an aggregate. So you've got, say strawberries, right? You've got somebody who's willing to part with some amount of money for some amount of strawberries, right? And all of those people in that market form the demand curve. Some people are like, I'd pay $1 for strawberries and no more. Some people are like, fuck strawberries, dude. All right. I hate strawberries. I'm not even going to pay, I'm going to pay 1 cent for strawberries, and that's it. And then there's some people who fucking love strawberries so goddamn much that even if strawberries cost $50 per bundle, well, I'm still going to buy strawberries, right? And all of these people create the demand for a market. Now, demand curves are curves. They can be inelastic, they can be elastic. Obviously, in the case of livers, this is where the sort of the 2D supply demand model gets a little bit more complicated, is that an individual's the propensity to buy a liver is dependent on their individual demand, right? So you've got some people like me who, I wouldn't pay a penny for a liver because I don't need one. And then you've got, people who are basically, hey, I'll pay $2-3 million for a liver because I really, really need one. And efficiency of a market is when you're able to distribute resources in such a way that the demand of people who most desire, most wanted, are met based on a supply of those things and an equilibrium, right? Now, in the case of monopolies, for instance, you've got a scenario where that's not happening. They're extracting premium from the market and they're not efficiently distributing goods because less people have access to them because of a premium cost that they're making, right? But in the case of organs, it's virtually the same. It's just on the consumer side, not necessarily the supply side, which is that you've got a scenario where someone is able to obtain a liver based on their ability to pay and not necessarily their actual demand for that liver. So we're constricting the market and we're not supplying livers to people who actually have that demand. Well, one more sentence. Because some people would be buying livers. A lot of people would be buying livers not necessarily based on their actual need. So obviously everyone... No, I understand. Chester, I get that. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a waning and waxing curve here, right? So you've got some people, like say Jeff Bezos. The doctor says you're going to need a liver in like a year, probably. Well, Jeff Bezos says I'm a 100 billionaire. Fuck it, I'll just get a liver today. I'll just buy it. Oh, is it $10 million for a liver? Whatever. I'll just buy it. And what that causes is you've got people on the front end who actually have the most demand for a liver not being able to be connected by that resource because of a function of the market, because people are able to...
So, can you repeat that sentence? I want you to repeat the sentence.
Right. So you've got a scenario where based on people's demand curves... Say again, sorry?
Just go on, sorry. I hate to interrupt you, I'm sorry.
You're good. So you got a scenario where basically the people with the highest demand for a product actually aren't able to obtain that product because of a function of the market. The efficiency of the distribution of this good is not being met. And that happens in virtually every market for one reason or another to a lesser or smaller scale. But in the case of healthcare, to broaden this out, because we're getting bogged down on the organ example, but to broaden this out, in the case of healthcare, in the case of organs, it's the propensity for inelasticity of demand of services and demand of organs, or products, you could say organs are a product, causes an inefficient allocation of those resources.
Why is it inefficient? Because people at the front end who need to have it most, in your opinion, in the moral argument, are not getting it first, as opposed to the people who are going to buy it off of the market at the highest price. Because you're defining efficiency based on who pays the most money for a thing being able to get the thing. I'm defining it as the market, which market efficiency theory states that if markets function efficiently, it will be difficult or impossible for an investor to outperform the market. I like the wrong thing. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, you're linking a financial definition of efficiency.
You're right. I like the wrong thing. Correct.
You're fine.
Sorry,
so
I was reading 2 or 3 things. Let me touch on this though.
Yeah, go
back to where we said initially. We have to define efficiency, because you can't define efficiency based on the need of the person going, "Oh, I'm sickest." That's not efficient, and that's where it doesn't. We have to define efficiency here.
No,
because
I understand.
Of course, the supply and demand with money is efficient. The question is whether or not, because the key of your argument really is, why is it right if Jeff Bezos pays $10 million, but the guy at the front of the line who's about to die, who can't sell his house and get $10 million, doesn't get it? Am I right?
No, I'm not making a moral argument here. It is based on the efficiency, and it's based on the distribution of that resource.
It's more efficient that the guy who needs it immediately and dying gets it more than Jeff Bezos?
Okay, so the answer to that question is yes, but it's not like, oh, morally he should get it because he's dying. No, it's just not as, because for instance, take shoes for example, right? the people with the highest demand for shoes are able to purchase shoes on the open market because it's ubiquitous. There's a lot of manufacturers. It's a very competitive market. There's not
So the problem is that the money's too high.
no, it's not you. I really don't think you're listening to what you're either not listening or I'm explaining it poorly. So like what I'm trying to say is that when it comes like I'm just finish the example with shoes, right? Shoes are a competitive market. It is a structurally very competitive market for virtually all the reasons that I said before, right? And so because of that, the distribution of the resource of shoes is relatively efficiently distributed, just leaving it to its own devices, letting the market sort itself out. That is fine. The people with the most demand for shoes are able to buy shoes as they see fit because, number one, they're not that expensive, and number two, because it's a competitive market and it's generally extended across people that have the most demand, right? But in the case of organs, it's not at all a competitive market because it doesn't, there's no structure of the organ market that is competitive, right? We don't have an ability to manufacture them. There's not competitors. There's not full free flow of information. There's obviously not free entry and exit. I mean, for God's sakes, to exit the fucking liver market, you have to either get your disease cured or you have to, as a supplier, you have to sell your liver, obviously, to exit that market, I suppose. Well, you get what I'm saying. It is necessary. The only way you get livers is from people currently, but
may I?
Right, and so I'm just the final point was just to say that the efficiency of healthcare and the efficiency of the organ market, it's not best determined by market forces. You have less of a supply of, not supply, but how do I put it? You've got you have less ubiquitous allocation of those resources, and it's less based on the demand of consumers and more based simply on propensity to pay, which distorts the actual clearing of that market. Some things in society are better when they are decommodified, and they are more efficient when they are decommodified. I'm a capitalist,
I completely disagree.
But in the case, well, if you completely disagree with that, well, hold on. But here's the question you have to answer, though. If you completely disagree with that, why do you advocate for nationalizing emergency care? If you completely disagree that some markets are better when they're decommodified, why do you think we should nationalize emergency care?
So I said that we could do two things. We could regulate it or we could nationalize emergency care, because I think that there's an argument to kind of have that middle ground there. I truly do. I do think it'll derail it if we continue on that point, and I do want to touch on kind of the things that you just said. I think what you're doing is you're completely gutting any opportunity for any sort of innovation on any sort of organ generation technology, 3D printing, making monkey livers or something. I don't fucking know. I'm not a scientist. But the point is that by making it and completely refusing any sort of private market interaction, you're making it so that there will never be any innovation on this unless the government chooses to spend money on it. And I think it's a poor idea. And let me tell you why. First of all, if we go to a fully private system, what you'll have organ merchants, and I mean this in a polite and respectful way, in the sense of like a medical practitioner, where they would have a pre-existing agreement with you, like say healthcare, like a health insurance, whereas we will buy your organs from you at this price or what have you. And then when you die, if they can get them, they get them, and then it goes on to the open market where they're bid on. And those companies get maximum dollar for it. Say Jeff Bezos pays $1 billion. Where do you think that $1 billion is going? Into the market to be able to not only increase supply, so be able to get more people to organ donate, because it's something like 12% donate. So the more we can get to donate, the better. It helps people, but also we might be able to generate technology that could generate organs. And when you remove the ability for private institutions to get money, you remove the ability for them to innovate. And what you're doing is you're making everything objectively worse. And again, the entirety of your argument is the price is too high and the supply is too low. We can't do it your way because their supply is too low and it's too expensive. Well, the only way that we can get it lower and increase the supply is to either fund it with ridiculous amounts of money through politicians, which is notoriously hard to do, or to leave it to free market enterprise. Because I'm telling you, if you said, listen, private institutions, all the healthcare guys, you guys want to spend billions of dollars in order to create organs for people? We're cool with that. Compete on the free market. Bezos is paying $1 billion for a liver. They'd do it. It's the crux of my argument, man. With this whole thing is on this one point that we've been debating on now for like fucking 40 minutes, which is cool. It's fun. It is really is that the crux of your argument is we can't allow the private market to do it because the people who need it the most, quote unquote, according to the subjective choice of the doctors, quote unquote, they need it tomorrow or they'll die. It's immoral for us not to give it to them and rather put it on the market. Sorry, that's why I said right at the beginning you have to separate the moral arguments from the economic arguments.
I'm not making Chester. I'm just gonna interrupt here because you keep on saying I'm making a moral argument. I am not making a moral argument. The argument is simply that when you have a demand curve that is changing and inelastic or sometimes very elastic, depending on the individual person, that market in and of itself doesn't necessarily have to be distorted. You know, for instance, gasoline's an inelastic market. It's also very competitive because we've got a lot of suppliers of gasoline and there's competition in that industry. Now, at the same time, we still have a way to cultivate gasoline, right? We have a way to cultivate it and actually produce it. Now, in the case, well, Chesterfield, it is a
way we cultivate it.
Yeah, you said, well, Chester, for God's sake, that's like saying, it's like if I responded by saying, well, what the fuck, Chester? I mean, why do we even need to worry about economics? We could just have a company create the material translator like in Star Trek and shit would just be, no scarcity anymore. I mean,
hold on. It's totally reasonable for them for an insurance company to exist to buy their organs upon death. Right now, our organ donation rates are like in the 10%, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But if that company was incentivized to go and make contracts with people to buy their organs upon death, we could skyrocket our fucking organ donation rate through the roof, which would supply the market. And that's not incentivizing people to hurt themselves or kill themselves. We're not hurting people, like creating people in body bags and like fucking out of the matrix and shit. That's an easy way for these private market companies in order to generate organs for the organ donation market. If they're going onto the private market and they're incentivized with their money. If Bezos is paying $1 billion, they'll pay $100,000 for your fucking liver.
Well, sure. Okay. Well, I guess we've said all we can in that regard. So, sure. I just want to make it clear. Can
we take a 2-minute break here once you're done? I just
need
to get coffee.
Yeah, sure. No worries. So I just want to be clear that I'm definitely not making a moral argument, but once you're back, we can broaden the discussion to I mean, I guess. More generally, we can have our maybe our closing thoughts. I don't know unless there's more ground to cover, but yeah, go ahead and get your coffee and.
Well, I mean, I think we banged down on one of the on one specific point, and I truly still believe that you're still making a moral argument, and I think that you need to recognize that.
Okay, well, Chester, even if that's the one moral argument I'm making, by your definition, I brought up about a dozen very empirical, very demonstrable arguments before this, right? And we haven't responded.
And I'm happy to respond to the points that you feel I haven't responded to. We got seriously off track. So if you have things that you feel I haven't addressed, then you can bring them up. But like I said, and I'm going to go get a coffee after I'm done the sentence, almost all of those arguments that you've made with empirical arguments are strictly arguing a straw man, where you're going, listen, the American system is bloated. I agree, it's trash. It's better in this system. Okay, great. I'm not arguing for the U.S. system as it is.
All right, but then when I made an economic theory argument that wasn't based on the U.S., you said it was a moral argument. So you've dismissed both the empirical arguments and the moral arguments because you think that economic theory is morality, which is kind of...
Bring up that economic theory again when I'm back. All right, I'm back.
Yeah, sure. So I think to broaden it out a little bit, again, all that I would say is that structurally the healthcare market, it does not efficiently distribute goods by virtually any metric, right? So, that can't be solved with privatization. I don't think, even if you get rid of regulations or things like that. I just, to me, you cannot necessarily say that again. Sorry.
Well, you don't think that the supply towards the healthcare demand could be filled? You don't think there's a market there?
I don't think that the supply of healthcare demand... Well, you're
arguing that it's inefficient because there's no price disclosure, which we can fix with regulation, or the prices are too high, which we can fix with competition, or you're arguing that there won't be enough a supply available for the demand because there won't be enough capitalists somehow to fill the largest market in the U.S.
Well, no, I mean it's not a.
Why is it
Yeah, I guess your point seems a little, I guess, muddled in my brain, but it's inefficient. It's not competitive. That's really the main reason. Now you can talk about ways to increase. Okay,
why?
well, why I mentioned it earlier. So I mean, if we look at the structures of what makes a competitive market, right? Well, the free flow of information, and that information is not asymmetric. Well, it is in the case of healthcare, and it's
That's
not
why
free flowing.
that's why you hire a specialist.
No,
And you
I
shop around and find a specialist. Sorry, I don't know anything
well,
about my car, but I take it down to the guy down the street that I know I trust, and he tells me what I need to do with my car. So yeah, I'm not going to know everything about healthcare, but I'm going to have a doctor that I trust who's going to tell me what to do. So the argument of, well, we don't really know all that much about healthcare, so we can't make a decision. Sorry, that doesn't fly, man. There's a lot of I don't know anything about IT, and I can still hire an IT guy. The government doesn't need to mandate IT.
right, I understand, but obviously the government doesn't need to strictly regulate IT because it's not a necessary good and it doesn't affect the health of its citizens, right? I mean, so that's really
But your argument doesn't fly. Is that the people are ignorant about healthcare, so the government needs to mandate it. They hire
no,
a doctor.
no, Chester,
That's
you didn't
the
let me
doctor.
finish. You didn't let me finish the
Please
argument,
continue.
Chester.
Then
Right.
please continue.
So my
Do you have
argument
more
is
time?
not right. So my argument is not that we need national health service because the flow of information is not free and it's not symmetric. It's asymmetric. Well, my argument is that because of that, because we don't have a plethora of options to choose from, because the elasticity is ever changing and typically inelastic in its emergency cases, because there's not necessarily an ability at that point to negotiate or leverage your prices, because the insurance market is horrifically inefficient for a whole other host of reasons. Because we don't have substitutable goods, right? The fact that medical services are not commodities, they're not substitutable, they're not differentiable is what I'm trying to say. Or I'm sorry, they are differentiable is what I'm trying to say. And so all of these things, the fact that there's not free entry and exit, the fact that there's high fixed costs and diminishing marginal costs, all of these things means that healthcare is almost uniquely one of the structurally least efficient markets that we could possibly have. Is why national service makes sense.
Government regulation.
So government regulation does not cause an asymmetry in information of the healthcare market. Government regulation does not cause the healthcare industry. Well, hold on. Government regulation doesn't cause the healthcare industry to have high fixed costs, right? Government regulation doesn't cause the healthcare industry to be non-differentiable, right? That's not government regulation.
What do you mean by non-differentiable? And you realize that you just ignored 3 or 4 of your own points, right? Listen.
No. Stop, Chester. We're not going to get sidetracked here. Stop. No. We're not going to get sidetracked here. So it is true that government regulation or lack thereof could theoretically alleviate some of the problems with healthcare and insurance, but the overwhelming amount of problems cannot be solved by government regulation. That's why I quote unquote ignored the other few points that I made. Now, in terms of your question, why does healthcare have high fixed costs? Well, it's absolutely not because of government. It's because you have to invest a lot of money to ensure that the healthcare you're extending to people, whether it be a medical service, a medical device, or a pharmaceutical, is actually effective at doing what you say it does. That costs a lot of money.
FDA rules?
No, it's not. It's because when you're testing a product, such as a healthcare product, pharmaceutical, if you're testing a shoe, that's easy. If it fits, that's all you have to figure out. Right, but when you make a pill that says, "Hey, this pill does this to your body," that requires rigorous testing and investment because number one, the pill has to be proven to do what you say it does by your own metric.
You're saying the pharmaceutical market is the same as healthcare. That we should nationalize it.
No. I talked about pharmaceuticals, medical services, medical devices.
Listen to the argument that you just made.
Mentioned 3 things. Yeah.
You talked about pharmaceuticals. Your argument doesn't make sense.
All right, let's talk about medical. If you deny that, we can talk about medical services because all the same arguments apply, right? So,
please stop interrupting.
Well, you keep on bringing up things that I'm like you're
Arguing a straw man. I'm not saying that I want to institute the U.S. system. So pointing at the U.S.
I didn't
system,
mention the US system, Chester. I just talked about in theory the theory of markets. Again, I'm not talking about the US. You've already rejected those examples.
listen, hold on. But you're going, there's not enough competitors. The cost of entry is too high. There are high fixed costs. Why are all of those problems that we need to government regulate?
So
That's like saying government regulate SpaceX out of existence because it has high fixed costs, high barriers to entry, not ease of movement in and out. It's not a fucking argument.
it is an argument, Chester. It's an
No, it's
economic
not.
argument. So, well, you can.
If you change it, addresses those problems. You're arguing a straw man.
It is
I'm
not
not
a straw man.
advocating for the U.S. system.
I'm not
If you get
arguing
one
about the US system. It's a structural problem in the market.
No, it's not.
So what
makes
about
health-
oh stop.
Any
What
other
about
market?
what about the Canadian system doesn't have high fixed costs? That just doesn't exist in the
Why
Canadian
is
system?
cost something that makes it where you need to nationalize it? Are we
So-
going to nationalize SpaceX? Are we going to nationalize oil rigs because they're high fixed costs?
No, because the plethora of problems does not exist in those industries. Space travel
Why
is not a because space travel doesn't have the problem of inelasticity of demand. Space travel doesn't have the problem of non-differentiable products, right? What I'm trying to say is that in the case, hold on, Chester, for God's sakes, okay? In the case of healthcare, there's so many structural problems. The sum of all these structural problems is why nationalization works. Huh?
Because you're arguing that we have to use public because the current system is broken so bad we have to use public, right?
Well, no, not the current system. The structure of the healthcare market, whether it's a private market in New Zealand or in South America or in an African country or the U.S. For God's sakes, the U.S. Every healthcare market, whether private, when it's private, has these structural problems. It's not. I'm not bringing up a straw man.
I'm not advocating for those systems. I am advocating for a totally free market.
Every healthcare market has these problems. That's what I said, Chester. I'm not bringing up a straw man. They all have these problems.
No. I completely disagree. I think that those problems can be solved with the free market. I think if you were able to have actual competition, if they didn't have to jump through a million fucking hoops of government regulation in order to do basic research, if they didn't have these fucking fixed high costs because they have to follow through 9 fucking things with FDA approval in order to get the basics to be able to test on humans. Things like what Donald Trump did, which was the Right to Try Act. I think that was Donald Trump. Correct me if I'm wrong. I knew it was early. Might have been Obama. I'm not sure. But that was a good thing to do to allow them to test experimental drugs if they're going to die. The fact is that everything that you just said are issues with the market that are problems with the market, but there's no reason why extra competition can't be garnered through other ways where loosening up the market might cause extra money to come in, because you certainly can't make the argument that there isn't supply of healthcare or that people aren't going to be able to fill that demand. There's people like fucking and shit with billions of dollars that would throw money at that if it was available.
How does the free market solve the differentiable problem with medical healthcare?
For the record, I'd like you to define the differentiable problem.
So a product is differentiable when a customer can not only tell the difference between the products, but also that the products themselves cause different outcomes, that they're different in some way. So for instance, like gasoline, right? Nobody really cares where the gasoline comes from because it's all the same shit basically, right? It doesn't really matter what kind of gasoline, like if it's Shell gasoline or if it's Chevron gasoline, it probably doesn't really matter. It's a commodity, right? Now, this is one example, just one out of the many different examples of how the private market simply does not cause healthcare to be commodities. How does the private market solve that problem in your system?
Why is it a bad thing? I can hire...
So...
No, hold on. Allow me to expand on my point first, okay? I don't see that as being a problem because you can hire experts in order to make decisions and you can get consultations. For emergency care, I kind of agree with that point because you don't really get to make a decision, and that's why I said that insurance should either be regulated in order to cover that, or that should be a state issue for critical emergency care. That being said, the differentiation in that is in a lot of different markets. Stuff like I said, automobiles. I don't know shit about cars, and there's lots of different products that can go into my car that do all kinds of different things.
There's confounding things in the healthcare market. That's my argument, is that all of these things compound on each other. Right. I mean,
and what you're arguing is that the system right now as it is poor.
And no, I'm not. That's not what I'm arguing, Chester. I'm not. You keep on.
The market is unique that it can't exist. There are a lot of markets that have those issues that we're not arguing to nationalize. You're really just going back to the moral argument where the economic arguments don't stand up. There's a lot of private markets that have the same issues that you're mentioning that we're not arguing to nationalize. The only reason that we're arguing to nationalize this is the moral argument of, oh, the market sucks, we can't let people die.
So I'm not arguing a moral argument. So I'll put it like this, and this is what you're not getting, or you're either acting in bad faith or you're not getting what I'm saying, right? Which is this, right? Say for instance, I said, like say that. Well, hold on. Say for instance that I was a psychiatrist, right? And I was evaluating whether or not to prescribe someone antidepressants. And, I write up my report, right? And my report says, hey, this person has a long and documented history of dealing with depression. This medication didn't work. This medication didn't work. They have suicidal thoughts. They're hurting themselves. They're cutting themselves. They want help, and all of these things lead me to prescribe this medication, right? Now, what you're saying is essentially you're talking to the psychiatrist and you're saying, well, what the fuck? There are people who are sad sometimes and they don't need that medication. Well, right, but it's the holistic nature of your prescription that matters. The holistic nature of my prescription for the healthcare market is, hey, it's empirically demonstrated that decommodifying healthcare and making it a national run service is way better in virtually every way, right? And I gave a bunch of empirics to prove that. You rejected the empirics. But now, because of the rejection of the empirics, the second plank comes into place, which is the actual reasons why the empirics come through that a more state-run system is better. And it's because of all of the healthcare market failures, structural in the market, private or otherwise, that makes nationalization a better option, right? But now you're saying that, oh, well, you basically said that, oh, well, some markets have some of these problems and we don't nationalize them. Right. But very few markets have this many structural problems. There's not a single plank. Yeah, go on.
But the reason why they have a lot of these problems are the things that need to be addressed by my platform.
The most structural problems, though, can't be addressed with privatization. They just can't.
They can't. Hold on.
How does the private system get rid of the insurance market? How would that be possible?
You put regulations and you put deregulation.
How do you regulate not having insurance?
You should know that the majority of the people who do not have insurance do so out of choice.
Right, but why do they choose that?
Because they don't need health insurance. For the most part, it's people under 30 who don't feel that they need to have insurance for their health.
Exactly.
Why is that a bad thing?
No, it's not a bad thing. I said exactly. So the people that choose not to buy insurance, not to participate in the healthcare market, are the people who don't actually need those services. And so if we had a more privatized, you said essentially a regulated but totally privatized system, except for emergency care, which would be nationalized.
There has to be some regulation somewhere. I mean, it's just.
I understand, and that's a reasonable position for you to take, of course, right? What I'm saying though is that if that's the case, right? If that's the case, the only people paying into the market for cancer drugs and the market for cancer-related medical equipment and cancer-related medical services, the only people paying into that market, because we don't have insurance in this scenario, apparently,
sure,
is people who have people who have.
You have to stop because you're wrong. No, there would be insurance. It would just be regulated. Insurance is fine. I mean, I'm somewhat against insurance as a concept to begin with, but I agree with insurance for healthcare. I'm fine with that. It just needs to be regulated, some changes. Like, for example, with the emergency rooms, is either we nationalize emergency rooms or we have it so that way it's regulated where you get covered, because you can't just be driving
Right.
down the road and clutch your chest and go, I have to go to that one down the road. You fucking pull over, right?
Right, but there are examples of private insurance markets working, but it's probably because of regulations that you wouldn't agree with. So I mentioned Switzerland earlier, right? Now I don't agree with the Swiss model. I prefer a national service, right? But the Swiss model, what they have there is they have price caps, they have a mandate of buying insurance, and they have a minimum coverage standard for what insurance has to cover, right? Now, if you agree, say again, sorry.
I'm against price caps, but go on.
Right, but what I'm saying is that in the only market in the world that's as privatized as the United States is Switzerland, and it actually works, right? Switzerland, people in Switzerland pay less for their healthcare on a median basis, on an average basis. Then
pay so much for healthcare?
Do I know why Americans pay so much for healthcare? I think I do, but I'm interested in why you think that.
When you look at the healthcare costs, it spikes, at least as far as I'm aware, it spikes during Obama's term with the ACA. And it's strictly because they're forced to cover people with pre-existing conditions, which is absolutely fucking insane.
Right. So everyone in Switzerland has minimum coverage available to them, and they pay less than we do in America. Now,
correct.
Well, if it's correct, then it doesn't really prove your point, right? The point.
You also have to realize is that the market in Switzerland is significantly more compact and different than the market in America. It's like comparing the wireless network in Canada to the wireless network in the United States, or certain points like South Korea and not North Korea, obviously. And trying to compare it, contextually, they're totally different. Switzerland's compact into a very tiny area with a couple cities, where you're trying to compare it to the entire market of a 330 million person nation. You just do it.
Oh, no, I agree. But the thing is, the propensity for healthcare to devolve into high fixed costs and diminishing marginal costs means that with scale, the market for health insurance should become cheaper, not more expensive. Our size, hold on, really quick, one more sentence. Our size should give us an advantage, but it doesn't. And it doesn't because healthcare is a terrible market, structurally, no matter where it is.
So the issue is that my point was that, first of all, there's regulations and gouging and issues within insurance. I think that one of the things that needs to utterly be tackled is the ability for competitors to enter the market. I think that they're being stymied not only by cost and regulation, but issues like insurance. All they're doing is jacking up the costs every year and just making it worse and worse with very little coverage. I definitely think that there could be a lot more movement done in removing the regulations to be preventing competitors from entering the market, especially with things like performing basic procedures. I know in Canada, for example, they're starting to privatize clinics and nurses and things for basic care, and I'm very, very much in favor of that. A good example is things like removing moles that they think might be cancerous is being done in doctors' offices as opposed to hospitals. A lot of the doctors are kind of like in the middle ground with private clinics, if you know what I mean. So the argument that you're making, though, overall, is that the system is so fucking broken overall on all of these different points that it can't be repaired. But my argument is that when you're pointing to this empirical evidence, that really is, and I hate to say it, is kind of the definition of a straw man. Because I'm not arguing for that system, I'm arguing for reform.
Right, yeah. Right.
And I know I'm repeating myself, but that's kind of the core of my argument is going, listen, I understand that there's high costs to enter. We can remove a lot of those costs. Maybe we can incentivize some of those costs. Probably use the wrong word, but like give money for buildings and shit, give land for free and stuff, right? I'm happy with incentivizing private businesses like that to help stimulate fixed costs and stuff. I'm against bailouts and stuff, but stimulation for stuff like that, sure. We can try to reduce stuff like that. And when it comes to the cost of the market, how do you think research is done? It's to be able to capture that profit that's there. And then as soon as you have 2 or 3 companies that are all competing, Because you got to realize is like, let's say that a 3D printing company gets into healthcare and prints a way to make livers, and as soon as they hit the market and disclose reasonably what they're doing, not the specifics because it'll be protected by IP, but it'll come out and people will start to compete, and then all of a sudden you got 3 companies giving livers. Man, that price is going to go down, homie. Now all of a sudden we got cheap livers for everybody. That's a great thing, right?
Well, I do agree, homie, that the price is going to go down, obviously, if that happens. But I think the problem, though, is that what I'm describing is that there are actually ways to make the insurance market run more efficiently, right? And I talked about the Swiss model. But the problem is that you disagreed with the structures of what made the private health insurance market in Switzerland more efficient, right? Which was price caps, a mandate, and a minimum basic coverage that's extended to everyone.
Out on this, because the only thing that I was really against that is price caps. Because my position is to take economists, politicians, and doctors and do a regulation pass on all 3 of the issues that I had seen.
Well, you said pre-existing conditions was what made the U.S. system so expensive, but Switzerland pays less per capita. They pay a lot less.
What I said was including pre-existing conditions. The problem is that the mandate doesn't mean that you're going to get crazy high coverage. You have a minimum coverage. I don't know what people with cancer, when they sign on, are getting compared to the 2 systems. I was talking about why there was a big jump in healthcare from pre-Obama to post-Obama, and it's because the insurance companies were forced to cover people who had pre-existing conditions. That was my argument.
Well, what I would say is that even before Obama, America paid a lot more per person for healthcare than the rest of the world, and it's right, and it's right. But okay, so don't say that I'm using a straw man. You're the one talking about the U.S. system. Okay, that's why you framed the debate in terms of like just now. I'm saying that you brought up the reason the U.S. is so expensive. I'm arguing against that point, right? That's all I'm saying, right? I originally started this by talking about Switzerland, right? And that's all.
The U.S. system.
Huh? Sorry?
I don't want the U.S. system.
No, I understand, but I'm talking about the Swiss system right now, right? The Swiss system is the system you want in theory, which is a private organized system that simply is regulated in some way, but it's privately run and organized, right? Now, the thing with the system in Switzerland, though, is that they cap the prices on the consumer end, right? That if you're a consumer, you don't pay more than a certain amount for your insurance, right? There's minimum basic coverage that everyone has access to, covers pre-existing conditions, obviously, right? And there's a mandate for purchasing insurance. You have to have insurance in Switzerland, right? All of these things make the insurance market more efficient, more effective, right? I agree the U.S. system is trash. You agree the U.S. system is trash. What I'm saying is that if you wanted a system, what it sounds like is you want a system kind of like Switzerland, but without actually a lot of the things that makes the private Switzerland model actually work.
What I agreed with in that sentence was price caps.
Well, right, but that's one of the things that makes the... Well, forget it. Okay, we're getting bogged down on this.
Hold on. I have to address this. We're not going nowhere. Just hold on. The point is, I'm happy with regulations on the system. We need regulations in certain places. I would like a system like Switzerland. I personally don't agree with price caps, but that doesn't shift my fucking position. Price caps are stupid, but I don't think that makes it so that way that works better. It doesn't change the whole position overall if there's one thing that they do I don't like. Right? I'm happy with the Switzerland system. That's what I'm arguing for, is a fully private system that is regulated with consult of economists, doctors, and politicians.
Well, if you're
system.
Well, hey, if you're consulting the doctors, politicians, and economists, obviously I don't think we should necessarily consult this is a technocratic discussion, right? So I think I'm going to discount the politicians. Doctors
sure. They need to be involved in this legislation. Go on.
Doctors Doctors complain heavily about the U.S. system and its inefficiency in billing and how it's hard for them to even focus on providing care for patients because they have to worry about billing and they have to worry about the financial context of what they prescribe to the people who are seeking healthcare from them, right? And if you're talking about economists, it's not even a competition. health economists overwhelmingly support either a public option or a single payer system. And the debate in the health economics, profession and field is
What's a hold on? What's a health economist? The fuck
a
is that?
so you said consult economists. A health economist is an economist whose research primarily focuses on the structure of healthcare markets and how what makes them better, what makes them worse, running experiments, running studies. I don't know what else a health economist would mean to you, but that's what a health economist is, right? It's just an economist whose research is on the healthcare market.
Go on. I didn't realize that was a real thing. I'll eat some shit on that one. Go on.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's it's not eating any shit. It's just a field of study. But the overwhelming number of health economists believe in a single payer system or public option, right? And that's really the debate in that community. The debate isn't necessarily if we should have a more private or a more public system. It is the propensity to which you should offer minimum basic public coverage. Is it just a basic public option that only covers lower income people? What do you cover on the public option? Or do you just nationalize the entire system? And that's really the debate.
I'm really sorry, but that's...
Well, what I said is true. I'm not lying to you.
I know that, but I'm trying to phrase this properly without making it sound like I'm a fucking nut job. But okay. I'm going to reference back to climate change, because I think that there's a real problem in climate change science, and I'm not denying this, okay? I'm not like that. But I think that the statement that you just made and referencing that group suffers from the same thing that I see in the climate change science, is that they have a concept already agreed upon, and they're negotiating on how far we need to go on that same concept. They're not researching things that disprove their point. All they're doing is researching things that are going to firmly make their point with a preconceived notion already existing. And you just said it yourself. They're not researching ways that they can fully privatize the market and fully push it in the other direction. All they're doing is negotiating on the line in which they're going to nationalize the healthcare. They have a preconceived notion, and they're working around that point.
So I think this will be my final statement, and then you can obviously have the last statement usually for the guest, I suppose. But my final statement on this would be that if you're going to say you want to consult economists to form a better, more perfect healthcare system, but then immediately just let me finish here. But then immediately dismiss the entire field of study by saying that it's structurally biased because they're not researching ways that could go against them. The reality is that's what all economic research is. For instance, I wouldn't say that a physicist is biased when they believe in the Big Bang theory, right? Oh, well, you're not studying things that can make you wrong. No, the reality is there's a lot of fields of physics, and we can agree based on previous research and based on the holistic nature of research and the broad consensus across time and across fields of study that certain things are generally the case in economics. That doesn't mean you don't, still research them and still try to prove their case. There's a lot of replicability in the claims of health economists, that a single payer system or a public option system is better than a more privately organized system, whether you're comparing that to the US or other privately organized systems across time. And that's all that I'm saying. Well, that's all that I'm saying is that the last thing that I'll say is that the
giant straw man. Go on.
Well, it's not a straw man. You literally said you don't trust health economists because their research is biased, right?
I said the research is based around a preconceived notion.
Okay, well, the point is you said that their research is not legitimate for one reason or another, right? And so what I am saying, well, for God's sakes, Chester, explain what the fuck you're saying then, because you just said I don't believe their research because they have preconceived notions. Now, if that's not saying I don't believe them because they're biased or whatever. I mean, what do you trust economists or do you not? Do you want to use economists' input to make a healthcare system or do you not?
Can you listen to what I'm saying?
Answer my question.
Well, of course I'm going to trust the economists. Now you're going to listen to what I have to say. Okay? The point is, the economists that are doing this research are doing so, first of all, building upon a straw man, because they're arguing against the current U.S. system or the U.S. system historically, where I am not advocating for this current system. I'm advocating for a system that undertakes massive amounts of reform. Secondly, The point that I was making about the economists on this, the health economists, is that just like climate change, they're likely operating with a preconceived notion, and instead of researching the field itself, they are researching the field with this preconceived notion. They don't research things that potentially cancel or challenge their claims. That's the point that I was trying to make. Now, can I make a closing statement, or would you like to continue and do yours? I'm not sure if I interrupted too much. We got to start.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that even assuming that's not what you're saying, the reality is that behind the research of health economists is typically replicability. Like when an economist says that a system-wide change should take place, that's on the back of typically an absolute shitload of research that is demonstrable, that is... No, it's not a straw man. Dude, things that disagree with you are not automatically straw men, right? I mean, what you're...
system as it exists now.
No, it's also based on healthcare systems of the past. Every country has gone through their own healthcare revolution. Obviously, at one point, Britain, Australia, at one point, these all had privately organized systems, right?
Not what I'm proposing.
I understand, Chester. I understand.
A straw man.
I'm not arguing against a straw man. I'm simply stating what the general held consensus belief amongst economists is, right?
Okay.
Right. So the generally held consensus belief that economists have is that a single payer system or a public option is better because of virtually all of the structural problems in the healthcare market that I described previously, right? And that when you sum all of these problems together, the best system, at least in my opinion, my view in this realm would be single payer is better than a public option. But my view would be that single payer is the best way to remedy all these problems, that extends access, broader access to healthcare to more people, has better results empirically across the board, whether it be on cost or health outcome, right? And that you don't have a system that is economically inefficient to the point that people go bankrupt trying to afford healthcare costs. And so people don't... So, okay, I'm not even going to respond to that. It's just demonstrably false what you said. But the U.S. has a unique problem with health bankruptcy in this country. But, you know, besides all of that nonsense, well, hold on, you can touch on in your closing statement. Besides all that stuff, you know, the single-payer healthcare system, I think that's why empirically and based on the economic theory, I come down in favor of a single-payer system. But anyway, your final thoughts, go for it.
So I came in here in good faith, and I think that you've done the same. So don't take this as a personal slight, but I think that this debate is really the crux of the healthcare bullshit that I debate all the time in this server. You came in here with a preconceived notion, and you have yet to address the fundamental issue that by pointing at the U.S. and other private systems, that's not what I'm proposing. The system needs drastic reform. It needs actual regulation that helps people, and it needs less nationalization. The problem is that the entire system over time has slowly crept towards nationalization, and all of the research being done only further cements nationalization. And I wonder why, and I wonder where a lot of their funding comes from. The problem is that there's never any research on going fully private. There's never any research on actually theoretical things that might actually help. All that's being used is a straw man argument. Every single piece of research that you link will likely, like you said, empirical evidence, baby, but theoretical evidence still, or theoretical arguments still exist, and we can still examine theoretical debates. So when you argue it about empirical evidence, about the existing United States shithole of a healthcare, insurance, and education market that needs drastic reform.
Well, I made like a dozen theoretical arguments, Chester.
I'm interrupting my thing, okay?
Well, I mean, you interrupted mine a bunch. I'm just saying, I don't say I didn't make theoretical arguments. I made about a dozen of them.
No, I'm saying that you're not considering the theoretical arguments that I'm making.
I see, okay.
The argument that you're making is that the system as a whole, the market, has so many flaws in it that we have to somehow fucking nationalize. Probably about a fifth of the U.S. economy that deals with healthcare. It's absolute nonsense, and you're going to make things completely worse for everybody by doing it. And all of the research is being pushed in one direction, and anytime somebody tries to do research in the other direction, they're hit with a giant wall of empirical data looking at a straw man. because they can't get funding and they can't look at theoretical ways to improve the economy by privatizing things. Because it all goes back to the same straw man of, well, private systems are shit in reality. Well, what if we tried going further towards privatization and it's hit with the same wall of but evidence? Sorry, but we can argue for things that are theoretical too, and you don't just get to dismiss them. And that's what I mean by you're doing nothing but arguing against a straw man the entirety of everything that you linked. You know, a lot of the things that you've brought up, I've been able to challenge. I don't think we'd do good going back over other things, but I really truly believe that with the profit motive, providing efficiency and a way to actually be able to track success and customer demand is fucking important, and you can't just brush that off. And any sort of argument towards, but the market is shit and there's all these inefficiencies. Hey, let's work with economists and see what we can do about fixing it. And when you point at Switzerland and you go, yeah, this will work, and my only complaint is really, well, I don't like price caps, I don't see a real argument in your point there. And lastly, I really truly believe that almost everything you're arguing is against a straw man.
Okay.